1
Hello,
minute.
hello. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. Give people time to come in. This is Dr. Lorenzo Neal, preparing to go live with our ZeraToday radio show. So, would be Jeremy, my man. Hey, Jeremy, it's long time, man. I'm happy for you. You're doing good things. You make Mr. Neal feel good and old. Blessings to you, man. Blessings to you. Good morning. Come on in. We'll be going live shortly on Blog Talk Radio.
Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Blog Talk Radio.
He's a man who's going to tell you like it is.
You can never be afraid of something that you don't know about. Now that's ignorance. And for us, ignorance is not bliss.
He's a man who's not afraid to talk about the real issues and not skate around it.
Don't you think it's about time that you got tired of where you are? I mean, you have got to be ready for God to do something for you and let him move.
He's a man who loves his God, his country, and his people.
Honest with you, I'm not too fond of the political state of the world, and particularly the U.S. as it is right now. But if you want change, you have to make it happen. You can't keep settling for less than what you ought to have.
He's a man who's sowing seeds of life, love, and liberation to anybody who's willing to hear.
There comes a point in time where everybody just needs to shut their mouth up and listen to God. And God is the one who will lead us, and God is our truth. He'll cover every area, every facet, from politics to church to you name it. God's got it covered.
He's a man that seeks the heart of God for the people of God. Pastor Lorenzo.
Good morning and welcome to ZeraToday. I'm your humble host, Dr. Lorenzo Neal, hailing from Cajun Land, USA, here to present you with seeds of wisdom, insight, empowerment, and liberation, promoting a knowledge that is engaging and transforming, and helping you, our listeners, to knowing and impacting the world that's around you. We're live on Facebook. Hi, cousin. Hi, sister Elmore Carpool, and hi, Rosie. Good to see you. Thank you for joining. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Appreciate you for tuning in. If you are watching by live Facebook stream, you can leave your comments there. I'll try to read them and catch up as much as I can. If you're listening by way of Blog Talk Radio, you can join us on this illuminating journey by dialing 347-237-5230. That's the number to call to get your thoughts, commentary, dialogue, whatever it is. 2 cents, 4 cents, 6 cents a dollar. Get that on the air. That way, by way of Blog Talk Radio. You can also follow us on all our social media. I want to encourage you to go to the Zera Network page on Facebook. Go there, like it, and follow us all on Twitter, Dr. Lorenzo Neal. I'm on Twitter at Lorenzo T. Neal. The show handle is at Zera Radio. So you can follow us all there on all our social media outlets. Go to visit my webpage, lorenzotneal.com. And if you haven't ever gotten a copy of my book, you go get a copy of my book, A Breach in the Family. It's been out for a while. I don't really talk about it that much, but you can get a copy. Hi, Cheryl. Thank you for tuning in. Appreciate it. Get a copy of the book, Breach in the Family, there on my website, also available on Amazon.com. We have a couple other things, projects coming out. We have a book of meditations. Actually, it's pastor's words from the bulletins at the church. We did, back in the day, pastors used to put their words in the program and the bulletin. So we've taken a collection of those and we are putting that in book format. That should be out. I think it'll be out in April sometime, so be looking for that. And we have a couple other manuscripts that we're working on. Hopefully, the working title for one is called where are the stones that mean something. And it's going to talk a little bit about that today, but not going to get too much about it. And then the other one is a speech that I did at the Black Non-Believers 5th year anniversary event in Atlanta, Johnson. I want to give a shout out to Mandisa Thomas, who is the president and founder and all big dog of Black Non-Believers. I had the opportunity to share at their event, and my speech from that, my presentation from that event, we're putting that in book form. If you have never heard it, you can go to my YouTube page, and it's there so you can listen to it, critique it. I'd love to hear that, because you know, how rare is it that a Christian pastor gets to engage in a non-partisan way with persons outside who are non-believers, atheists, secularists, humanists, all of that. And I tell you, they are loving people just like everybody else. But anyway, so those are some of the projects that we're working on, and we're soliciting your support. As always, you can support us on that. One of the best speeches ever. Oh, you're too kind, Cheryl. Thank you. And let me give Cheryl Abrams a shout out. Cheryl Abrams, she's some of everything. Wonderful evaluator and author. You can get her book. Can't think of it. I have her book, and I think I have both of her books, but I definitely have her first book. And Cheryl Abrams, Roz Collender, give a shout out to her and her her Facebook lives that she's been doing. Rosalind Speaks. I tell you guys, got to tune into that and what she's talking about, addressing very, very big issues. Dr. Vanessa, thank you for joining in. Appreciate it. Sister Lynn, my wonderful member, thank you for tuning in. So if you've seen the topic, what we're talking about today is we're talking about our history, our narrative. Basically, who controls the narrative controls the identity. And regarding Black America, who's controlling our narrative? Therefore, that's the question we're asking. Who's controlling our narrative, and and who is contributing to how we identify as Black Americans? But before we go any further in the show, I want to take this moment to express condolences to the family of Dr. John Cherry, who was the he was the founder and pastor of the Full Gospel AME Zion, that later became known as, I think, From the Heart Ministries. If you ever watched BET back in the day, you saw Black preachers shine. That was the time you had people like Frank Madison, who is now Bishop Frank Madison. You had T.D. Jakes. You had Dr. John Cherry. You had even Creflo Dollar. You had Lance Watson. You had a plethora of Black preachers of renown on that network, on not just on Sunday mornings either, but a lot of them were on Sunday mornings. And Dr. Cherry was one of those who was on that broadcast, and he was probably on several other networks, but I'm just speaking particularly, that's the one we had most access to. And Dr. John Cherry, he was so unique in that, being a part of African Methodism, he embraced the mystical side of the spiritual side of the charismata of it, and stepped out and embraced that and found a way to integrate it into his ministry as an African Methodist Episcopal Zion pastor. And he started that church there in Maryland area, and it grew phenomenally, and it blessed a lot. And it came, as in church politics, big wigs didn't like the fact that he was outshining them. And I'm speculating. I'm speaking speculatively here. But what ended up happening, he separated from the AME Zion, and there was a conflict about property, as it always is, because you're part of a connectional church. And connectional church, if you don't know about a connectional church, this is how it operates. You're part of a connectional body, but all property is held in trust of the connectional church. So like right now, if my members at New Bethel and I, if we decided to stop being AME, we could no longer worship in this building, even though the members built the building and all properties related to New Bethel are in the trust of the AME Church. You know, that's why we have a board of trustees for the Episcopal District and board of trustees for the Connectional Church to be aware of all of these things. But anyway, his ministry still prospered, and I kind of stopped watching. I stopped watching televangelists largely because of the fact that they stopped ministering. You know, I won't say, I'm speaking in generalizations, but pretty much they just got off track. You know, they got off track, and so I just left it all alone. And every now and then I may catch one on television, local. I do watch local broadcasts, local ministers here. But I just want to extend my condolences to his wife and his family and all the members that he served. I went to the Old Black Church website. Sister Ann Brock, I want to encourage you all to go there. It's a wonderful site also. And she mentioned she has a write-up about that, and you can go and read that. But we are losing some great people, some generals, as I guess you could call them, in the body of Christ, in the Black church, in Christendom altogether, but in the Black church. So I just wanted to take that moment out. Also, there's a couple of other interesting articles that I read there on the Old Black Church website, and a couple other websites regarding the Black church, and the issue that we're facing, the uncovering that we are facing as the church universal. This is the apocalypse. This is the uncovering that's happening in the church universal, with the uncovering of sexual misconduct across the board. And it's no longer been relegated to the Roman Catholic Church. We're seeing it in the Southern Baptist Church. We're seeing it in the Church of God in Christ, and the Pentecostal assemblies of the world, in the AME Church. AME's it's across the board now. And Baptist, it's across the board. And I think this is a wonderful opportunity for us to not just see a call for greater transparency as humans in ministry and as humans in religious vocation, but we also can see this is an opportunity to reconnect with the divine. And I think this is because when we see the sacredness of our human relationships, and when those relationships are violated, and in some cases, very tragically violated, then that should be a call to us. There should be a call to us to say, okay, what is more important, the organization or the human component of the whole organization? And I will tell you, the human component is more valuable, because without the human component, we have no religious organization to begin with. So that's why I think this is a wonderful opportunity for us, those who walk actively, engage actively, and serve actively in Christian ministry, to one, say, okay, this is a greater problem than we thought or that we tried to cover up, and to not cover it up. It's going to be challenging, I believe. Matter of fact, I know, because it's challenging for me as a pastor to live a transparent life with those I serve. You don't want everybody in your business, but at the same time, you want to be able to say, okay, I'm accountable to you as a leader, as your shepherd leader. I'm accountable to you, but I'm also accountable to God as I am accountable to you. So if I am aware of anything that is violating you as a person in my immediate care, then I should be taking action on that, especially if it's regarding children, vulnerable persons. We should be taking action to care for them. And but it's a wonderful opportunity, I believe, we are in now. And I think we'll rise to the occasion. I really do. I think that this moment of uncovering as difficult and challenging as it is, as the author in James writes, it's going to work for our benefit. Let this moment in time, let us go through it and let us endure it, knowing that we'll come out of it better. So that's my hope and that's my prayer. Elder Marshall, thank you for joining. Reverend Mills, thank you for joining. Hey, Javon, my boy, thank you for joining. Appreciate all of you for joining today. So I won't get off on a tangent and get off on a rant. I want to make sure that I stick to the topic at hand. We are in Black History, Black Heritage Month. And this is the last full week that we will have in this month. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to help us do greater reflection, exploration, and discussion on who we are. And then I'm going to do it from a historical, oratorical perspective and from a church perspective, because the Black church plays a great role in how we identify as Black folk. It's, we can't escape that. So the question, as I was reflecting and I was reading through a lot of this sources that I may use, and that got me to thinking on this. I thought about, as a kid growing up, and the concept of Black History Month was still new. It was not really embraced. It was celebrated. It was observed, but it was still kind of new when I was coming up. And up until the point I got into high school, I guess that's what I would say, that it really began to take on the form that it now has, and that was in the early 90s. But prior to the concept of Black History Month was still kind of new, even though Carter G. Woodson is credited as having established the Black History Week and all of that. But for a very large part, it was relegated not to the deaths of us as a people in the country, and then it got relegated to only first. We only observed and celebrated those who had done first. The first African American this, the first African American that, first this, that, blah blah blah, and that was mostly what it was relegated to, with pockets of historical anecdotes, like the Little Rock Nine, Ruby Bridges, and now we get the Black Wall Street, and things of that nature, and that's good. That was great, because because of those first, I got to explore different aspects of our history. I have to give credit to one of my high school teachers, Miss Nancy Johnson, who's now resting with the ancestors. Miss Nancy Johnson, along with all the other, a lot of the other faculty members in my high school, were very, they valued the heritage. Mr. White, who was one of my, is not just a civics teacher, but he was also, I consider him a major history figure. He didn't do anything major, but he changed the minds of a lot of folk who went on to do great things, along with Mr. Walter Rush. I'm going to go down the list just from my high school, the faculty from my high school, who were very valuable in helping me understand and reframe and reshape my perspective of who I was in my existence as a Black person. And but Miss Nancy Johnson, whose husband was a pastor, still is pastoring, as a matter of fact, still pastors there in Monroe, she internalized the need for us to understand our history just beyond what was written down in the books. Because at the time, the history wasn't that, the written history that was put in history books was still fresh. You're talking about the civil rights movement was only, it was, you know, the remnants of it was still there, you know. We were still under desegregation when I was in school. You know, we were still under, I don't like using this term, but we were still under forced busing, you know. So when I was in elementary school, I was bused, even though there was a predominantly black school right down the street in walking distance. Our neighborhood was divided, literally. It was divided. So there were streets where if you were on this side of the street, you went to a you know, across the track to the school, and if you were on this side of the street, you went down the street to the black school. You know, that was the feeder school for our high school, middle school, junior high, and high school. And I didn't understand that then, but you know, as I grew up and I understood, I learned more. Man, I was eating up the history that Ms. Johnson taught us about the city of Monroe, Louisiana at the time, and to know what she knew, you know, and share with us, man, it put me in a different perspective again, you know, as a kid. And she went on to start the African American Museum there, that's located in Monroe, Louisiana. And I had the opportunity, you know, she had the collections, she had we would be in class. Now we supposed to be doing English. We were doing English. We published the school newspaper, but in all of that, we were also gaining a lot of information about the rich wealth of history from in our hometown. And it was presented to us in a narrative that was ours. So there was no mainstreaming it to make other people appreciate it, to make other people, you know, to make it other people not feel bad for not being a participant in our history. And I believe that is what's happening now, and that's why I asked the question: is it our history? Is it our history and our narrative? Or is it just our history that's being whitewashed? And when I use the word whitewashed, I'm not talking in any negative overtone or anything like that. I speak it simply in that it has been mainstreamed. It has been tempered to be wider received, to be received by a wider audience. So therefore, that's how you can get narratives, and like we have in modern day Black history, that children are being fed narratives that I believe are insufficient for identity. But then again, it's a whole different thing. Let me put again within context what I mean by the word narrative. I'm speaking specifically within the idea of our culture sharing narrative. Now, you know, if you're into linguistics and you understand the word narrative, where it comes from, narrare, and that the Latin root word actually means knowledge and skill, or skill, you know, it depends. And the adjective is where we get that word narrare, which is in English narrative, and you know, so we get that the idea of narrative being how it is presented. And you know, I think you can just do a basic Wikipedia search, Google, and you'll get an idea of, you know, the different forms of narrative. When I was studying, when I was in grad school, and my first graduate degree was in liberal studies, and the first I had dual. It was dual. I had music theory composition, but the secondary part of that was rhetorical criticism, rhetoric, and writing. And it's now, I think, at the program, it was at the University of Arkansas Little Rock. The program is now called technical and professional writing, but when I was there, it was rhetoric and writing. And so in my rhetorical criticism class, I'll never forget, one of the concepts we learned, and I still have the book. I still have that book about rhetorical criticism. Yeah. See, I still have it. Y'all can't see it, but anyway, still in my library. If you ever want to get it, this book is Sonia J. Koss, Rhetorical Criticism. Now, this book presents the different types of means of presenting rhetoric. And I wrote a paper, but anyway, I'm trying not to get too far off. But anyway, one facet of rhetorical criticism and rhetorical analysis altogether. You have the three plots, you have the three layers to that: ethos, pathos, and logos. And for our culture, traditionally, historically, ours has always been an oral history. And that's why the slaves kind of identified with the Bible when they were hearing the stories of the Bible preached by learned preachers or unlearned preachers. They internalized those stories because they had this history of relegating their history orally, and they had the oracle we know as the griot. And there's still griots today. I believe. I honestly believe the hip hop movement of today owes its credit to our griots of yesterday. Both those who did oral, those who did it musically, and those who just did it by story. Just by telling the story. As a matter of fact, that's such a powerful concept. The narrative is such a powerful concept that we use that in conveying what we want to happen. I'm trained in sharing my story as a gun violence prevention advocate with Every Town for Gun Safety. One of the things we do is we share our story, and every time you share your story, you're unveiling a piece of yourself and a piece of your history, and a piece of your the thing that was empowering to you or life-changing to you. But anyway, so from that perspective alone, when we're talking about cultural sharing and the oral tradition that comes with that, we know that from a biblical perspective, up until the words of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, were written down, they were translated, they were given orally. That's the same with the New Testament. Those collections of narratives were written down, and not properly sourced, unfortunately. But it's not like those who wrote the Hebrew scriptures and those who wrote the New Testament scriptures, who put them down, written down. They didn't properly. They had their sources, and I don't believe that they actually thought it would get as far down in history as they did. So, but we have it. And the same thing with our oral tradition. Those oral traditions that come from the continent of Africa, and the various tribal stories that have now come into our conscious in some capacity by way of, we hear of Aesop's fables, we hear of ancient African proverbs that are now, we even see some of those ancient African proverbs in the book of Proverbs, but some were coming, they came from different ways. We also hear in the retelling of what we call fairy tales. Some of those European fairy tales are retellings of ancient African stories. We know this. This is validated. I wish I had more evidence to present, source material to present but you can Google it. This is a lot of the stuff you can just Google. You're not gonna find pure source material, but when you do a reading, when you're doing your searching, you don't just want to get the first couple of sources. You want to dig down deep and find reliable sources. But those reliable sources are there. they're there. So but anyway, so we know that just as those stories that linger with us now, the fairy tales, and some of them we cherish. Thanks to Disney, a lot of them have now become mainstream. um, Unfortunately for our history as Black Americans, that link to the narrative it got interrupted. So the link to the narrative and our heritage and our history has been misplaced. So, excuse me, as our elders, as they transition on and they don't leave with us the oral traditions of our families, the oral traditions of our churches, the oral tradition of our communities, that gets lost, and it gets replaced with something that is more modern. And by modern, I mean within the last 100 years or so. That's modern history as we understand it. Modern history, I guess you can even go back to the beginning of the empirical era of the 16th and 17th centuries, because that's what most, particularly in America, that's what most of our ideals and a sense of beginning starts also in the 16th and 17th centuries. Anyway, I digress. But that history, for the most part, has been in some ways misrepresented, and in other ways just mishandled, because we take it and we don't fully internalize it culturally. But then again, let me stop there. There are some things that we do internalize culturally. For example, if you think of the Black community, there's some automatic imagery that is going to come to you, automatically. You're automatically going to think, probably first and foremost, that they're all associated with the Black church. They all go to church. And when you put that imagery together, you have the church mother with the hat, or the first lady with the hat on the first pew, or you have the preacher, the Black preacher, the typical hollering Black preacher, all that. Or you might have the Black preacher with the nice hairdo. That gets me, man. Al Sharpton back in the day, brother. Power to you, Al Sharpton. I don't know how you wore that perm, brother, but you wore that perm, man. I'm just picking on him. I admire Reverend Sharpton and the work that he has done and is doing. I don't always agree with a lot of what he has said or what he has done, but I tell you one thing: he has been consistent in what he is doing. So that's another tangent I didn't intend to get off on. There's value in collective narrative. There's value in the collective narrative. I wrote a paper and published it about a narrative for Black boys, introduced to them by way of a rites of passage program. And I still want to follow. I've been seeking to develop that from just abstract into concrete, So and I know there are a lot of persons and a lot of organizations. There are a lot of people who still have this idea of a rites of passage. I don't believe it's as mainstream as it needs to be in Black America. There is no central rite of passage initiation for young Black boys, across the board. And I believe that's one of the things that we need to introduce to them, largely because we can create the narrative for them as they go through that process. We can create the narrative for who they should be identifying as, and how they should identify. And in creating that narrative, it gives a sense of empowerment and liberation that will, I think, be more beneficial in the long term, in addition to the education that they receive in public schools, private schools, parochial schools, wherever they go, because they're in dire need. We are in dire need. So a collective narrative, when we look at it culturally, from the cultural perspective, when we say, what is the history? I'll use an example. my church recently celebrated its 90th anniversary a couple of years ago, and there had always been a written history. And if you go to most churches, most denominational churches, most older churches that have been around for a while, they have a written history, and in that, at least they should have a written history. There's certainly an oral history, but in a lot of times there's a written history. And so the person who did the written history for our church, it stopped around 1987, 1990, somewhere in there. So that was the last. And that person, I believe, went on to go or transition, and they hadn't kept up to date until we did the anniversary, where it was brought up to date, so we have a greater understanding of the history. But that history being written down gave me a sense of how I should pastor the church. And then we took that written history and put it into a visual history. So now when we did the actual church anniversary, not only did we have a written history, but we had a visual history. We had the pictures of the Brush Harbor, where what was the Brush Harbor that eventually became the area where the church now sits. We had the pictures of members, early members of the church. We didn't have pictures of the founding members, but we had, pictures of some of the early members who lived on, lived well into life. And we have pictures of after they tore down the wood church and built the brick edifice under the person of Reverend C.J. Johnson. And this is the building that we are currently in. That was, nearly over 50 years ago was built. We have pictures of them walking, and walking, making the march to the new edifice. And we have the, pictures of worship during that time and all of that. And it was wonderful because it gave me a sense of a grounding for how to pastor this church. Now I have a great understanding of the history of the church. I know how to interact with the people. I know the rich wealth of life that these people have been providing to this community for over 90 years. That was empowering to me as a pastor, and it helped me understand, okay, this is how we should be ministering to this community now. This is what the heritage was, this is what the history was, and this is where we are now and what we can do to broaden and further the work of the local church just within. And we, I was restrictive in our ministry. We're restrictive. We're like, okay, this is where we are. This is who we're going to focus on. We have 6-7 blocks that we're going to focus on in ministry. We're not going beyond that. We ain't trying to be a mega church. We're going to serve the immediate needs of the people of this community. And, it's been working. It's been working so far. But I said all that because that's the Christian component of that. And because of that Christian component, the church understanding their history and writing their narrative so that no preacher can come in and try to create their own narrative. And I think that's part of what's happening in the Black church now. We have a lot of independent churches who are creating their own narratives and disconnecting from the broader narrative of the Black church. But that's a whole other discussion today. A whole other discussion. In doing so, I was wondering, okay, what are the social narratives, historical narratives that we can draw from? And I was like, wait, weren't there some slaves who did that? Did some slaves write their narratives? And of course, the Library of Congress is rough with that. You can go to the Library of Congress and you can find narratives of, let me pull some up. I saw a few. Oh boy, my laptop is acting up. Let's see. Documenting the American South is a website that you can go to, and you can find collections of authors and who were former slaves who in their either in their last days, some of them, as I would read, some were presenting their entire narrative before they were killed, executed, and that was grieving to me. Some were egregious, of course, acts. But that's neither here nor there. But then there are things that are the narratives that like that of Andrew Jackson, and I'm not talking about the president Andrew Jackson, but you have to go and look at and you read his narrative and the adventures that he went on, and of course there's the narrative of Frederick Douglass that I believe everybody should have that book. Every black person in America should have a copy of Frederick Douglass's autobiography. Compilations of several, and it depends on where you go because there's some others who have reprinted it. I prefer that you go to the family and they can give you one. Anyway, who else? Of course, the life and labors of the right Richard Allen, founder of African Methodism. The poetry of Phyllis Wheatley, which is somewhat semi-autobiographical. Y'all know what I'm talking about. But so I went through and I read through and I did read through them, and I was like, wow, these persons were unlearned, and yet they picked up the skill to be able to tell their story. They were able to tell their story. There are a couple of narratives that were written, that were narrated by the author, and the author is given credit even though they did not write it down. It's just like some scripture. Let me stop. That's a whole other thing. But to think about these persons who had endured great human suffering. Some escaped to their freedom. Some, after receiving their freedom, wrote their stories. And later on in the 1930s, there's a collection of recordings that you can hear from those slaves who were still living at the time when this technology came about, and they were able to share their stories, and also with video, the film and the records. You get a chance to see how valuable their narrative was to them, how meaningful their narrative was to them, how powerful and emotive their narrative was to them, to the point that it was moving. It is moving when you read the accounts, and it's moving when you hear the accounts. And I think we should all be going and doing that. And I believe now that has been that is gone. That is gone. The idea that these persons' narratives of freedom, though in print, we don't have, our grandmamas not doing it. Our great-grandmamas, our great-granddaddies, that's about as far as I can go back. There aren't that many great-greats. There are, but, that the oral history of our families are lost, or I won't say non-existent. It's just, what's the word I'm looking for? It's just there. They know it, but they don't share it. And so the children coming up, they go to grandma's house. They don't know enough about grandma, And in most cases, let me use great grandma because they're grandmothers, and I have to think about it, who are my age, just in their 40s and their 50s, and if their mothers are alive, then their great grandparents. So I guess I just contradict myself then. If they're, well, anyway, Big Mama, my dears. There are not enough Big Mamas sharing the story of the family. And this age where there's a greater ratio race children or biracial children now. So it's even more imperative that they understand, if they're biracial, the value of their black side. If they're black, it's more pertinent now that they understand that, because if they are biracial and if they're the other side, the non-melanated family, have a greater sense of their history, if they can trace their history back to the daughters and sons of the Confederacy, and or daughters and sons of the Revolution. Some of them can do that. And I'm not saying all that. Again, I'm speaking in generalizations here, but there's some families who, white families, can trace their heritage back far. And unfortunately for us, many of us can only trace our heritage back maybe 1 or 2 generations. And in doing so, there's that disconnect. We don't know, and we're not trying to find out. And it's doing a disservice to us, because the wealth of heritage that can be empowering to us is fading away. And what's left, or not left, but what replaces that is a mainstreamed and whitewashed. And again, I mean that term within the context of more receptive for a broader audience. And that's why when you hear about Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech presented at the March of Washington, you get just that sound bite of the moment, and forget the totality of why the march was organized to begin with. Who were the organizers of the march? A. Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin and their contributions prior to that particular moment in history in Washington, D.C. What did A. Philip Randolph do that created him and empowered him to be able to have that platform? What did Bernard, Raynard, can't even say his name right now. What did he do? And, he was an openly gay African American. He was an openly gay black man, scholar, advocate, engaged, but he was gay. And that was a no-no. So he had to do everything in the background. He couldn't, he'd be accepted today, but not then. And think about also, when we talk about Rosa Parks, and we know the story, Rosa sat so that Martin could march, so that Obama could run. Yeah, that's what we tell. That's the narrative we present now. But the reality is that Rosa wasn't the first one to sit. And wasn't the first one, hers was calculated. Hers was already schemed. It was planned. It just happened to be a perfect opportunity, but it was already planned. The person who does not get credit is Colette. I can't remember her last name, but she was the one who actually did protest, but because the narrative didn't fit the movement. She was a teenage, unwed mother, pregnant. That didn't fit the narrative that they wanted to, so, she was relegated to the annals of history, forgotten. Rosa got the seat. And, but that's neither here nor there. Both of them did remarkable, and we should honor the legacy of both of them. But again, it goes back to the narrative. Now the narrative that is being presented has been presented over the decades is that of Rosa, and there's nothing wrong with that. But again, and it's the same thing, and I'll go back onto what I just said. Rosa said so Martin could march and Obama could run. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was reluctant to lead or to even be a part of the movement. He did so under somewhat of compulsion by those in his community. Like, hey, you're an intellectual. You're better. You're a doctor. You're trained. You'll be more receptive. And, he also had to embrace the non-violent, even though he had studied Tillich and although he had studied Gandhi, he had not fully embraced that because he had been under threat. He owned weapons. He was ready to, he had the mentality, if they come for me, I'm coming for them. Then he had to be converted to the idea of fully engaging a non-violent approach. And I'm glad that he did, because it worked. Had he been a little more vigilant and militant as some were perhaps trying to get him to be, we probably would have been set back a little while. And then you have the narrative of President Obama, and I love the idea of the black president and all of that, and I love the fact that he was able to transcend the idea of race. He did that phenomenally, and the brother has swag. He has swag. You can't take that away. He and his wife are two of the most admirable persons in the country today because of their swag. But the narrative that was presented to us as a country was that he's black, but the actuality was no, he was privileged. He grew up in affluence. He spent most of his nurturing years outside of the country. So when he came back, and yes, he had to, particularly as he began to organize as a community organizer, he had to adapt and take on that role. And joining Dr. Wright's church helped him tremendously, reinforce the idea that, yeah, I may be privileged and I may not have been a part of the struggle of persons who identify as African American descendants of slaves, but one thing I do know is that what I'm receiving here at Trinity Church of Christ, United Church of Christ, what I'm receiving here is empowering and liberating, and my black don't crack, and I'm going to run with it. And that's a good thing that he did, and unfortunately, even that narrative was taken over because the broader narrative of LGBTQ and everything else became a part of the identity. And it's still now. We're finding, for example, and I hate bringing this up. I don't want to bring this up. The Smollett, I think that's how his name, Jussie Smollett, whatever, however you say his name. The idea that he tried to use both his sexual identity and his racial identity to create this, this narrative for him, and we're seeing that narrative fall apart for him. It speaks again to the idea that this narrative, our history, is being hijacked, and we have to get back. We have to get back to this sense of a narrative that is benevolent towards us. It does just not give us enough to get by for a month. Does not just give us enough to see a few figures who did first, and there's nothing wrong. We should celebrate that because it is a part of our national narrative. It's a part of our national narrative. I don't believe a lot of children today know that they may be descendants of slaves. Some, because of the darkness of their skin, assume that, well, I got to be descendant of slave because of the darkness of my skin. But look at me, I look at my skin and I know the greatness of my heritage. Not all my folk were slaves. Not all my ancestors were slaves. My maternal family is fair skinned for the most part. For the most part, they are fair skinned, and hey, I fit right in with them. But I said all that to say that as we close out this month in February, the one thing that we must do is we have to say, okay, while we're celebrating and while we're observing and doing all this, we have to dig deeper into this. There's a narrative that's missing. There's a narrative that's missing, and while our history is mainstream now, and I'll tell you, this is probably the thing that's more frustrating to me, is because folk want to identify with the history. By identify, I mean, the cultural movements that we began as particularly Black. And we see those movements in mainstream, just an example, I know something is over once it becomes mainstream. When they were whipping and nay-naying on like Good Morning America or something like that, I was like, you know what? That's it. Throw it away. When they were Superman and Soldier Boy or whatever they called it. And think about any other cultural dance. For me, being from Louisiana, when I see when I see non-melanated brothers and sisters doing the Cupid shuffle or the wobble, and I'm like, you know what? Y'all can have that now. Yeah, y'all can have that. Yeah. Or the electric slide. You know what? That used to be the black wedding go-to. Y'all can have that. I'm saying that in jest. Please don't. But anyway, I believe we have an opportunity now to be self-empowering, self-liberating. We have an opportunity to build on the history that we know. We know certain things, and though the narrative may have been watered down a bit to be more receptive and broader, we can cut that and we can say, okay, yeah, folks, that's the story, that's the gist of it. And I don't want to be like some recently I heard a politician, a national politician, say that we should not be concerned about the facts. The empirical facts. We should only be concerned about the moral argument and the moral facts or whatever, or the moral narrative. And I can understand that to a degree, but the problem is, if we just stick to that, we lose the totality. We lose in totality for us, because we need facts. We need facts. We need to be able to have solid things saying this is us. And we don't need to take that for granted. We need facts, and we can go with a broader narrative. That's all good, but the meat of the narrative needs to be defined and regurgitated by us. And to be honest with you, there are more ethno-historians who are not black who unfortunately have taken leadership in there. And you gotta, I ain't mad at them, because they've taken interest in us preserving our identity, preserving our heritage, and you gotta be proud of that. I wish that more young blacks would take an interest in becoming ethno-historians and ethnologists, and I don't even know if that's a word, but taking what we know, building upon that, and empowering us, and pushing the narrative out, making sure that the narrative is right, making sure that the knowledge is getting out there, and that it is not mainstream to the point that it's just enough for them to know. And unfortunately, I believe that's where we're going. I hate that is the case, but I believe that's where you're going. Anyway, let me get out of here. The time is running out. I appreciate all of you for tuning in. Thank you so much. And try to be here every Wednesday at 11. You can also, I want to invite you to support me if you so feel led to do so. You can do so by PayPal. Information is, I think I put it in the link. If not, this video will be uploaded to YouTube. So if you're listening on YouTube, you make sure that you like and subscribe, and you can do that there, and doodly do under there. Also, you can support me on Patreon, Lorenzo T. Neal Patreon. However you choose to support me, I appreciate it. Again, we've been doing this new format on Facebook Live, and along with the live on blogtalkradio.com/ZeraToday. So make sure you support us, and we welcome all dialogue. No trolls. Welcome all dialogue, and we want to invite you to. What up, Frat? Travis? Hey, man. We want to invite you to join in our conversations. Join in dialogue, share thoughts you may have, topics you might have, all of that. We want to be as empowering as we can. As we stated, this show is about liberating us. Restriction is not liberating, and it's time out for that. But anyway, thank you for tuning in. I appreciate all of you who join in. Share this video if you don't mind. And again, it will be on YouTube. So follow us on YouTube. Follow us on Blog Talk Radio. You can find archives from all the way back to 2010. Also on Zera Network, Pastor Leo's Zera Network. Go over there. You can listen to archived shows. And we love to hear from you. You can inbox me if you like. It's fine. If you'd like to hit me up personally by way of email, that's pastorlorenzoneo@gmail.com. And we appreciate all of you guys. Thank you so much. And I got to get out of here. Blessings.
60 seconds.